So I have the benefit of not having to go through a lot of the technical aspects of the circular economy, thank goodness, because I'm not a great guy with numbers and dates. So I'll talk through some of the projects that actually led us to designing this way. So I mean, as you've been told, I'm an architect. My partner and I both studied architecture, that's Safia, and she decided that, you know, there's a joy in working together even though we are often in two different locations. She's in London, I'm here in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So we're both interested in designing, as most people of our generation. The tiles are, you know, sustainable ceramic tiles from Morocco, and you know, looking into the possibilities of where we find ourselves as designers, trying to tell new stories. So we did this sort of series of illustrations that looks to re-examine traditional building materials here in Africa. So to say, you know, the thatched hut is actually quite an innovative solution in that the materials that are used are something that can be reused over and over again and for multiple uses. You know, you could essentially use it for clothing, for flooring, you know, designing furniture, as well as your roofing. Or the way that people in Africa use rivers, watercourses in rural communities that end up being their laundromats, their bathrooms, as well as, you know, a place to prepare their food. So we'll try and look at what is existing in front of us. So we decided to look at, in Zimbabwe, shopping, retail, you know, and this idea that you find after the crisis in Zimbabwe, the economy shifted to an informal economy. So people think that this is the way we should be shopping, you know, and you see that getting more and more the case with big box stores like Game and Checkers, and but in reality, this is how people in Africa do the majority of their shopping. So we said, as designers, we should really look to design for what is existing, not try and change everyone into this new or you know, Western idea of a retail environment. So we came up with solutions to design for vendors, you know, bearing in mind that they designed the stores themselves. We designed a series of solutions that they can adopt, you know, a shelving system that's adjustable, as well as access to sanitary equipment like a wash basin and sink that they could use to wash their vegetables and give them some kind of hygienic solution in their day-to-day lives. You know, there's so many things we take for granted, going to work, you know, access to electricity to charge our phones or a toilet to use. So we said, okay, most of them have umbrellas, so let's take that and invert a traditional umbrella, turn it into a rainwater collector, stick a solar panel on top, and that way they would have a power point where they could charge their phone, collect rainwater in the rainy months that they could then reuse. We also then looked at transport. So everyone here knows about a combi. So let's take, for example, Cape Town and Harare. Oh, here we go again. So on the left, I think is Cape Town, on the right is Harare. And it's simply just asking Google, how do I get to the airport from my home? And you come up with quite a few solutions. This is the MyCity bus route. And on the right, Harare tells you there's nothing you can do. You know, you either walk there or you use your own private car. Whereas Cape Town gives you a lot of routes, including Uber is on there. And what we realized was that that information is actually provided to Google by the service operator. And if it isn't, Google generated the system, which they call the GTFS, General Transit Feed Specification, I think. And they allow you as an individual to map out those routes and send them the information. So we said, okay, let's do that for the informal combis that you have in Harare. Because, you know, Zimbabwe isn't in a position where South Africa was, where, you know, the World Cup was coming. Johannesburg got the Hart train, Cape Town got its buses, and even though Cape Town has its buses, 60% of the transport that people use is still informal transport. So we went around mapping the routes. We got a third-party app that allowed us to capture this data in a digital format. It was really great. Everyone, you had to have an Android phone because it was a Google product. You know, this was just for ourselves, listing the route, the vehicle used, the capacity of the vehicle, and you start. You know, you start your trip, you are able to put how many people are on board, and you're able to note each time the bus stops. So we did that, got a whole load of data, and then, you know, compiled it for, I think, let me get this right, numbers. I think it's about 52 routes in Harare, and we took about 200 odd trips. And what we did to make this information accessible, we realized that Harare is a concentric city. Everything meets at the middle. So we decided to name the routes according to a clock face. You know, they all got a prefix 1 to 12, so that you had in that information embedded an idea of where the route was going, you know, which direction it was going, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you know, 10 o'clock, etc. So we did that. These are the, hold on. Those are the main points, you know. I'll put the color just for ourselves for the map, but the idea was that because it's being used in an informal setting, we didn't want to have a strong brand identity. We wanted the information to be as simple and as clear as possible. So the number was the main thing. Added on there some value additions to get an indication of what you can find along the routes. You know, the police services, the fire services, hospitals, schools and other institutions, post office, and points of interest. Put it all together, overlaid onto a map of Harare, and then you get an indication of what this system is. And one of the main reasons why we did this was that we saw an example in New York, which has a very robust transit network that is run by government. You know, but what happened was in the early 80s, there was a huge transit strike, and people started what they call dollar vans, which are more or less combis. And you get to a point now where the combi system in New York is the 7th largest public transport network in America. And it works because it's affordable, it's accessible, and it's able to adjust to situations. So recently they had a hurricane there, Sandy, and that was the only way people were able to get around. Because buses are too long, if there's a tree blocking the route, they can't maneuver around it. The subway was flooded. So you find that in the West, they're getting an appreciation of the kind of solutions that people in Africa and Asia, in the Southern Hemisphere, have adopted. And you know, we look at these as blights, but they're actually quite beneficial. So you see, you know, where all the routes meet in the city, and where they intersect, and it allows people, you know, the ability to find their way. I mean, if you've ever been on a combi, you'll know that, you know, your driver and conductor will know how to get from where you are, but to now get to another part of the city, they'll tell you, look, I can get you back to, you know, the Grand Parade, and you can make your way from there. And, you know, it becomes this negotiation to find your way around. So doing all that investigation, you know, going on, adding it onto the routes to make it more accessible. So this is maybe our first sort of effort that led us towards, say, the circular economy. This is Harare, and you know, the way it's broken down, even Harare as a city, a capital city, doesn't have streetlights all over. We're suddenly getting solar-powered streetlights, which is, you know, the way forward, not just for Africa, but for the world. You know, just it's less energy used from the grid. And so what happens is people use their cell phones to light their way at night. So we said, okay, how can we design a lighting solution that is able to be used in a rural or a weak urban environment in Africa, but then also be able to use in relief situations whenever there's a disaster, or as some kind of event, a lighting solution. So this is, say, the Victoria Albert Museum in London. So that was just an investigation that led us to do Cup Club, which is really where we started to see how the lessons we've learned as architects designing for sustainable solutions can be used to make a difference in the economy. So what we looked at was the environments in the coffee culture in a city like London, which is really more about coffee on the go. It's not like here in Cape Town where you can sit down and enjoy your coffee, with your mates. Or the Kugels gathered in Tasha's. That's just not the way people live. So they all pick up their coffee in these containers, which are the worst thing ever. They create the biggest waste stream. There are many waste streams, but for a city like London, this is quite a significant problem, because you get about 2.5 billion cups that create 1.3 billion tons of carbon emissions. And a lot of it just goes to landfill, because the way the cups have to be lined because the beverages are hot, you can't just use a paper cup. So you have these waste streams, and it's just an idiotic way of approaching anything. Just bags and bags of general waste every single day. So one of the things that we look at is there's this great organization out of the States called IDEO that talks about, designing human-centered design, designing solutions that people can use, and, tweaking those designs over and over again until you get to a point where you come up with what's needed. And this idea that actually recycling isn't the way forward, because it relies on the system that uses those commodities and those resources. If everyone used a more circular economy, then recycling wouldn't be needed. It needs us to have those single-use products all the time. So we said we don't want to do that. We want to eliminate a lot of these containers. Like there's this big move towards glass. Glass is a great solution because it's it's a reusable solution, and it's less pollutant than plastic. And we found that there's this sort of top-down approach, this was at the Paris Climate Summit, where they came up with an agreement. The artist Oliver Eliasson did this big dramatic work that, it's a clock, and it's melting and showing how little time we have to find a solution. And, people are moving towards rejecting the linear economy. And, there's this huge sort of celebration that, yes, we've come up with an agreement, but there also needs to be a bottom-up solution. They all work out that, we all have this, the number of cups that we started the day with. They don't really worry if, at the end of the day, they have less than they started, because, they can sort it out later. So it takes away the pressure on the consumer to manage the problem. And we said, wouldn't this be great if we could get Starbucks and other retailers to operate in the same way? But the problem is, everyone's so attached to their brand, especially, in this day and age. So we said, okay, how do we get a solution, a cup that everyone can use? So we started out by saying, okay, the size of the cup is pretty much the same, there are a couple of different sizes. So we wanted to have, the first reusable takeaway cup that you could use. That was premium because, they are premium brands. That's how they see themselves. Starbucks ain't cheap. So we said the sleeve should be something that they can all use. So essentially what it is you get your cup, it's scannable, So you can track the cup as it goes, and it's deposited just the same way you throw anything away. So it doesn't change the consumer's behavior. That's the one thing you want to avoid, because people don't like change. And then it gets collected after it's thrown away, much like they do in India, and then redistributed to the different vendors afterwards. So it's very, very simple. Everything is something that people don't really see. So what they should do is get away feeling that they're buying the exact same product from wherever they buy, without actually noticing a huge change in their behavior. Ideally, sure, everyone needs to change the way they live. We all need to take less showers, and use communal ride share as opposed to individual cars. But the best way to get people to do something different is to make them feel as if they haven't changed their life at all. So even for the retailers, we wanted to give them the opportunity to say, you're not changing much. So this is two different brands, Starbucks and Cafe Nero, which is in the UK. And you can still identify them as individual brands from the sleeve that they do give with hot beverages. So the idea is, let's eliminate this perpetual waste stream, and also the fact that instead of having these toxic waste dumps, you have collection points just next to any refuse container that then people just automatically deposit their cup in. So this is for where we are with the project. Is we're piloting it now with a bank in London to adopt in their head office, because they have one giant building with a couple of thousand employees. So it's an easy way for us to pilot it, which we're hopefully doing by September this year. So let me just, the collection points are always a heavy point of traffic, but you want the reusables to just slot in, so people don't feel like, oh great, now I have to go and deposit my cup somewhere. You just go to the bin, just the bin is a different color. And then the onus is on the retailers, and at the moment it's ourselves, taking back and rewashing and redistributing the utensils. So what would this mean? If we all switched to a reusable cup, what could we do? Well, it would reduce the global emissions by 47%, reduce water use by 85%, and this is also quite important for what Alex said for the local authorities, reduce landfill waste. And so, we approached it quite simply. We had to give the retailers what they need. The reason they love these cups so much is because they're so light and they're so stackable, and they don't really want to spend a lot of money on their retail space just to store these cups that you have to line up like you do in your kitchen. So we used Grasshopper and Rhino to model the cup so that you could get the same benefit as you do with the throwaway cups. And so this is the idea that, look, it could just integrate quite easily into people's lives. It's global, it's easily accessible, and a very social way of going about your day. And so we decided to make the product also smart, because everyone wants a metric, so you can connect it at a business level, B2B level, but also as a consumer. So you have an idea of how much coffee did you buy, and what is your level of impact. So we want to then say, okay, everyone has this idea of trying to make a difference in the world, and from this just little barcode on the base of the cup, they could then go on to an app and then track where can they find a retailer that accepts or distributes the cup. So it's very, and everyone does everything through apps, so that's the way forward. And then also on that app, you can able to track your own impact. What are you doing to make the world less toxic? And how does that rate to your best friend or your neighbor, or what your government is doing? So that's it. And I hope that was helpful. You know, Safi, my partner, always likes to say, this is the one I have written down, so let me look at it. The future isn't a place that we're going to, it's a place that you create. You know, so it's very important that we create the kind of future that we want to see. And you know, in Africa, a lot of that is mitigated against because of cost, but there are different solutions that we can do right here and now that actually cost very little to nothing, that make a big difference in the economies that we live in and operate. Thank you.